In Rusland kijken ze totaal anders aan tegen het neerhalen van vlucht MH17. Het westen is veel te snel met de beschuldigende vinger, is de opvatting van de Engelstalige staatszender Russia Today.
Hours after the tragic crash of MH17, a toxic mix of politics and speculation filled the airwaves and headlines worldwide, with the Western media already determining who to blame.
This is not a case where terrorists are operating without an address or home base. It's called the Kremlin.
Is it time to stand up to Russia's president once and for all?
Blame is largely on Putin, and I think we have to hold him accountable.
Well, the editor of Politics First says the West's jumping to conclusions will stand in the way of a proper investigation.
You cannot determine how a plane was brought out of the sky within a few hours. And that's what we saw last Thursday. Within a few hours, Western journalists and Western politicians had made up their minds that Russia was responsible. And that is not the way that an air crash investigation is carried out. You have to have an impartial, thorough investigation carried out by experts. And Western journalists, for example, are not air crash investigators.
Well, amid the West's accusations, Russia's defense ministry has provided evidence that Kiev may have had a hand in the downing of flight MH17. It has made public its own radar data from the area, and it shows a second aircraft in close proximity to the Malaysian plane. Air traffic control failed to identify it, which, according to defense officials, suggests it was a military jet.
At 5:21 p.m. and 35 seconds, another mark of an aircraft appeared at the point of the Boeing crash. This aircraft was steadily monitored by radar station Ust-Donetsk and Buturinskaya during the next 4 minutes. Having spotted the jet, an air traffic controller failed to identify it, as the aircraft most probably didn't have a self-identification system, which is characteristic of military aircraft.
Well, this is one of the satellite images released. It shows Ukrainian missile systems being deployed from a base some distance from the crash site. But in the next photo, taken on the day of the tragedy, one of the missile launchers is missing. It was detected by satellite near where the plane came down.
Ja, tot zover de visie van staatszender Russia Today. Voor de uitzending sprak ik met Dmitry Babich, politiek commentator van de radiozender The Voice of Russia. Ik vroeg hem eerst waarom de Russische media bijna geen aandacht besteden aan het feit dat de separatisten de eerste dagen na de ramp geen toegang gaven tot het rampgebied en niet respectvol omgingen met de lichamen en persoonlijke bezittingen van de slachtoffers.
The Western press, and especially the Ukrainian government, suspect the insurgents in the east of Ukraine of being disrespectful with the bodies. It was reported here, but indeed the video provided by the Western media was not very convincing. For example, you probably watched the moment when one of the rebels is holding a toy monkey in his hand. Well, next second, he puts off his hat and he crosses himself. So it was not a disrespectful behavior.
There's also a difference in how Russian media is reporting the cause of the crash. And there's strong evidence that the separatists supported by the Russians are responsible. But you see things differently. Can you explain why?
Well, first, most of the Russian press reports that it is possible that the separatists could have done it. It is not excluded. What the Russian press criticizes is the fact that President Obama, his State Secretary Kerry, and the vast majority of European leaders have put the blame squarely on the rebels, and they have declared the rebels guilty not only before the trial, but even before the black boxes were investigated and were examined.
You say the crash should be investigated before we draw conclusions, but access to the crash site was prevented by the separatists up till now.
Well, unfortunately, people in eastern Ukraine have very little experience of dealing with air crashes, and there is a war going on, and a war is always disorder. It's always a situation when it's difficult to make certain things happen. So I would say that probably part of the blame is with the Ukrainian government, which continues to bomb the nearby Donetsk, which is a huge city, and it continues its onslaught. So because of that, I think it was probably difficult to provide immediate access for the observers.
Mr. Babich, can you understand that the Dutch viewers do not believe you and consider this as offensive and painful for the families of the victims?
I think that I didn't say anything offensive and painful. Russian people sympathize and they express their condolences to the Dutch people. Our president expressed his condolences. The fact that there is a massive propaganda against Russia is not my fault. The fact that British tabloids hours after the crash came out with headlines like Putin's missile and Putin has killed my son, this is on the conscience of the British tabloids. I'm sure that Dutch people will understand one day that what happened in eastern Ukraine is a tragedy, not only for Russians and Ukrainians, but also for the whole world. And that they are people who died in that air crash. They are also victims of this war, the war which was unnecessary and which was provoked by terrible policies of the European Commissions.
But do you deny that Russia is arming and supporting the separatists?
I would not say that there are no weapons coming from Russia to Ukraine, but I am sure that there are no Russian soldiers and that these supplies are not made by the state. They can be made by some private funds, by some nationalist organizations. If Russian state has been supplying the separatists with arms, the separatists would not need to steal tanks from museums and use them in the war.
Mr. Babich, the Pentagon has provided satellite pictures of the rocket being launched from the separatist territory. Are you convinced?
I'm just surprised why they were not provided during the session of the Security Council of the United Nations 2 days ago. Mr. Obama then made a statement that he had satellite information that the plane was shot down by surface-to-air missile launched from the rebel-held territory. So it would be an ideal moment, an ideal audience to release these pictures, but they were not released at that session of the Security Council of the United Nations.
If this picture, Mr. Babich, is clear proof that the separatists shot down the MH17, will the Russian government apologize?
I'm sure that if it is proven that the separatists shot down the plane, and the Russian media does not exclude such a possibility, they could have mistaken that plane for a military one. I'm sure that Russian people will sympathize with the victims. The Russian government will apologize together with the rebels, and Russian government will help the international community to hold the responsible people to account. What I don't believe in is that the rebels have shot that plane deliberately. They are dying in hundreds and thousands, and to call them armed thugs, as the American representatives in the UN did, I think is a little bit inhuman, a little bit cruel.
Dmitry Babich, thank you very much for being on our program.
Thank you.